everyone. Wanted to go over the week 6 study questions about Chalmers, really focusing on this brief excerpt from a much longer paper about singularity. The first question is rather obvious. What are the 4 possible responses that Chalmers lists to the emergence of a superintelligence? That's pretty obvious. It's just there. I mean, the first one is extinction. The second one is isolation. I think the third one is inferiority, and the fourth one is integration, I think he calls it. Well, those are the possibilities, I believe. And then we get into what he actually is proposing or exploring. Number 2 of the 4 possible responses to the emergence of a superintelligence. We know which one Chalmers favors. I think, maybe that's not such a good question. Looking it over, it's not absolutely clear that he favors integration. But I think that's the one that he explores. Which one would you choose? Why? Well, I mean, I think what's probably most interesting to me is how he just summarily dismisses the possibility of extinction. And I think most of us would go along with him on that. But I think there's a lot of people who would say that human extinction, they would be a minority. But there are a lot of people who would say that human extinction is probably inevitable. And if we think in evolutionary terms, it is inevitable. That is, if we stay within a Darwinian framework of evolution, natural selection, the human species is a temporary thing in the sense that either it will go extinct entirely or sometime in the future it will evolve into another species. That's the inevitability of every species. I mean, species can stay stable in terms of what species they are for a very long time. But my understanding of evolution is that even a very long time is temporary. So that human beings it's just natural, inevitable that human beings will either evolve into another species or they will go extinct. And in either case, there will be no more human beings on the earth. And some people would say that's really not a bad thing. But as I said, I think that most people would go with Chalmers and say that the extinction option or the extinction possibility is not a good one. The isolation one, he doesn't favor either. I think he thinks it might just be impractical, but also that if we were to isolate ourselves from a superintelligence, we would be foregoing the benefits of a superintelligence. So that wouldn't be good, I guess. But if we think about, we should always be thinking about Jonas, I think, when we're reading people like Chalmers or Nick Bostrom, because I think that his thesis is something that's quite relevant and perhaps something that is on a deeper level than either of them were working at. But the third option, also inferiority, I don't know exactly what to think of inferiority, but some people would say that the very existence of a being that is far more capable than us intellectually would be so diminishing to the human self-regard, the way humans view themselves, that it would be some kind of disaster. I don't really see that following. I don't see that following necessarily. So I don't know. Maybe in a practical way, as he says, we would, if we were to live with a superintelligence, we would have to acknowledge that in many ways we were inferior, and then that would just make it more and more important that the superintelligence had our welfare at heart. But so in a practical way, I can see it being a problem, but I don't know about philosophically or in terms of how we view the value of ourselves just because there's another. But that's another one that he seems to reject. I mean, he seems to choose some form of integration where we ourselves, the human beings, become a superintelligence. obviously these are open-ended questions. Number 3, do you believe an uploaded version of someone would actually be conscious? Why or why not? I think that's a question that needs to be asked. That is, if the integration option is really ultimately probably, although he does talk about some sort of genetic enhancement, I guess, but probably a kind of a digital form of our personhood. If we can imagine that, would it be conscious? Well, that's goes to some very basic questions in philosophy of mind that have been explored by different philosophers. Some philosophers would say that an AI itself is a conceptual impossibility because a computer or a computer program could mimic human consciousness or could mimic the behavior of a person, but wouldn't actually be conscious. It would lack the features that make us unique as minds. So I don't know if that's true, but that's a question I think needs to be dealt with, is whether any artificial intelligence would be conscious, and therefore if some kind of uploaded version of ourselves, digital version of ourselves, would it actually be conscious? And then there's a further question that even if it were conscious, number 4, do you believe an uploaded version of a person would still be them? That is, if it would retain their personal identity. That is the question I believe that Chalmers in this particular excerpt ends with. I forget exactly what he says in the longer essay about that. But that is a very deep question in terms of the philosophy, not the technical feasibility, but the philosophy of the notion of mind uploading. I don't know the answer.